This week, we get a visit from former Senator Jon Kyl. He talks about choosing a Supreme Court nominee because he was on the Judiciary Committee and things about Arizona politics you might not know. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people I've been away.
Really excited this week for you to see the interview with Jon Kyl talking about Arizona politics and Supreme Court nominees. But we start every show off with a roundup of the big headlines of the week. We call it The Sweep. Well, of course, the elections are front and center, and Donald Trump, in an interview, was with Chris Matthews, and the question about abortion and punishment came up, and there has been some comments that made ripple effects all over the country. Watch this.
Do you believe believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
Well, since that happened, Donald Trump clarified and said the state should decide what happens. It shouldn't be a federal thing, that the state should be able to do what they want when it comes to abortion, but didn't clarify the punishment. So people started speaking out again. Donald Trump then clarifies and said that the doctors and medical people should be held accountable, but not the woman that gets an abortion, because only 10% of the country, 10% of the people polled, believe that a woman should be punished if she has an abortion, if abortion were illegal. What's interesting about this is Donald Trump and the double-edged sword of this. The issue is the people that love Donald Trump, or even are remotely curious about him, love the fact that he answers the difficult questions. You don't get a political answer from Donald Trump. Now, I've come out and I've said very publicly that I am supporting Ted Cruz. But Ted Cruz was asked the same question about a little over a year ago, January of 2015. He was asked about the same thing, about punishment, and he didn't answer the question. He gave an answer that was completely different than the question was, which is how you deflect when you don't want to answer a question. The thing about Donald Trump that people like is he answers the question, or he flat out says, I'm not answering that question. What he did here, though, was answer the question and have to clarify a couple of times after. That's the downside of speaking out without having a clear point of view. The people want to know exactly where he stands, and now it's being said it's always a moving target because he wants to say what people want to hear. The battle continues between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump about their wives. Donald Trump, this is where I'm disappointed in Donald Trump. Donald Trump retweeted that picture. We know about the picture of Heidi Cruz and of his wife, and the one of Heidi Cruz was a very unflattering picture. She's a nice-looking woman. And Ted Cruz has said, leave the wives out of it. The battle is ridiculous. And it really is. It's beneath the dignity of the office. Donald Trump did not originate the picture, but he retweeted it, and his answer was, I didn't start it. Well, you can say you didn't start it, but it's still childish. And as long as we're talking campaigns and Donald Trump, his campaign manager was arrested. And Donald Trump, he backs his guy. He says, I'm a loyal person. Watch what he had to say.
And then you have Ted Cruz. He should be fired. I say, why? I don't do that. I'm loyal. He did a good job.
Well, I don't know where you stand on the issue. Should the guy be fired? Should he have been arrested and have to appear in court? I don't know. But I'll say this. What he did was wrong. It was not the right thing to do. Whether it was a man or a woman, but especially because it was a woman, since when do we condone putting your hands on a woman in an aggressive way? She was talking to Donald Trump. She was walking next to him. The campaign manager grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Did he injure her? Did he cause bodily harm? Was it a violent act? I never said any of that. What I said was, it's not okay. Even Donald Trump supporters should be able to say what he did wasn't okay. Because of all of these things that are happening, the candidates were all asked again, do they support each other no matter who becomes the nominee? No one would commit. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump said, I don't think so. Moving on to the Veterans Town Hall about the VA. Senator McCain and I getting together. This time, the Care Veterans Deserve initiative that he is now putting out there was brought to the people. And he said basically that lack of accountability, that's the word of the day, is to blame for the fact that no one's been punished, no one's been fired, no one's been arrested, no one's lost anything that was the cause of all of these actions. I asked the senator after the town hall about that word accountability and if it's possible. Watch this.
There will be legislation this year. I am confident that accountability will be part of it. How significant it is a good question, because the Democrats are lined up, frankly, with the employees' union, with the government employees' unions. But we are doing everything we can. If we don't hold people accountable, then we will repeat the mistakes of the past.
Now, you see, I am not a big union supporter anyway, but in this case, this is the problem with labor unions, especially government labor unions. There are people that have committed crimes. There are people that falsified records to get performance bonuses. They collected thousands of dollars. Not only have they not been fired, well, now they've been fired, but it took years to fire them. They didn't get arrested. They didn't give back the money. It's a ridiculous thing. Moving on to the attack in Brussels. 10 arrested in raids across the country. 4 Americans were killed. 300 people were injured. Now, should we pause the refugee program here in America? Because the head in the House side, the people there, the intelligence community, are saying we need to just pause the refugee program to reassess how we bring people into the country. The president says, no, we're not doing that. John Kerry, more political rhetoric. So that's just, to me, very difficult. In Arizona, let's talk about the reading program very quickly. Lack of structure and oversight from the auditor's office. K through 3 grade, or the reading at a proficiency is abysmal. Diane Douglas partly to blame? Of course she is. I don't care if it's her or the school board. We've got to fix this problem, because third graders not reading at a third grade level makes it impossible for them to catch up later in life. We've got to get this right. All right, we have got just a few minutes before the interview with Senator Jon Kyl. So in just a few moments, Jon Kyl joins the show to talk to us about choosing a Supreme Court nominee. He went through that process many times. I talked to him about possibly being a Supreme Court justice himself, and some things about Arizona politics you may not know. That's coming up in a moment. Stick around.
The Mike Broomhead Show is brought to you in part by Cliff Castle Casino Hotel and Sanderson Ford.
All right, joining me in studio is Senator Jon Kyl. And Senator, thanks for doing this.
Mike, great to be here. Thank you.
As we just had the Arizona primary, how happy are you not to be involved in the process anymore, watching what's going on?
Well, I'm just like any other citizen watching from the sidelines, and I can't tell you that I'm really happy with the way things have gone in Republican primary this year, but it is the process, and the will of the people somehow will prevail, and our country will hopefully prevail as well.
I said I think that you're one of the rare people that when you left Washington, Washington misses you more than you probably miss Washington. And is that true? I mean, are you happy that you're a private citizen again?
Yes. Having the job I did in the U.S. Senate was the best job in the whole wide world, but there comes a time, I was there 26 years, both the House and Senate. That's enough, and it's good to be out of that, although I do keep my finger in the pot a little bit.
I would imagine with all the years of policy making, you still have people that want you to advise them on some things, because you were there for a long time and accomplished a lot for Arizona.
Well, and one of the things that I do in Washington, I still work in Washington part-time, is to help advise companies that find it somewhat difficult to negotiate all of the political process in Washington. Well, imagine that. It's really complicated sometimes. And if I have any experience to share with folks, certainly I know how the process works.
One of the big issues right now is President Obama nominating someone for the Supreme Court, and the battle in the Senate between the Republicans and the Democrats of whether or not he should do this in the final year in office. And then, you know, you've had people on both sides of the aisle say no when the opposition's in office, and you were on the Judiciary Committee. So instead of the battle of whether or not the president should nominate, what is that process? Because you sat on that committee. What happens?
First of all, the president vets potential nominees. They check out all the potential candidates that he might want to nominate. They decide on one. He's done that. Then the committee of jurisdiction, in this case the Senate Judiciary Committee, begins its own investigation of the nominee, looking into past decisions, the record in school, former colleagues, what do they say, all of this kind of thing to develop a dossier on the individual, which is then shared with all of the members of the committee. Then ordinarily, what would happen is a hearing would be scheduled by the chairman of the committee. In this case, that's Charles Grassley of Iowa, Republican. And eventually that hearing would be held, and all of the members would have a chance to grill the nominee on whatever they want to question him or her about. If they are satisfied with the nominee, eventually a meeting of the Judiciary Committee is called. It's called an executive session, meaning the committee can take action in that session. And sometimes it takes a couple of those meetings for the two sides to all give their speeches, and because this is all public and everybody wants to be heard, so they'll give their speeches indicating that they're either for or against the nominee, and then an executive meeting is held where they actually have a vote to either pass the nominee on to the full body of the Senate or not. Sometimes, even if the committee does not vote to send the nominee on to the full body, the leader of the Senate, in this case Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Republican, could decide to bring the nominee to the floor anyway. It's not likely, if that happens, that the nominee will get confirmed, but it's potentially possible. In event, at some point, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the committee action, the nominee is presented to the full body, and there is debate and unlimited debate, basically, and then eventually a vote. It didn't used to be that a nominee would be filibustered. That is to say, that anybody would try to stop the vote from occurring. But in recent years, basically since the year 2000, when Chuck Schumer led the Democrats, the process of filibustering has been done on many, many nominees. You might remember Miguel Estrada, the Republican nominee. There were 7 separate times we tried to get a vote on his nomination to the Court of Appeals. Democrats prevented it every time. And the way that works is you object to it occurring, and once there's been objection heard, it then takes 60 senators to override that objection. If you have a close split like you do today, 54 Republicans, 46 Democrats, it's pretty tough to get 60 votes to move forward if somebody objects. What Mitch McConnell and the Republican Judiciary Committee members, including Senator Flake from the state of Arizona, have said, and Senator McCain supports this as well, is that we're so deep into the election process for next president that the American people have a unique opportunity to basically have a hand in the decision of who the next Supreme Court nominee will be by deciding which presidential nominee to support. It may not be the only consideration, but it'll certainly be an important one. So the Republicans have taken the position that while it's fine to meet with the nominee of the president, that it would be a waste of time to have the hearings and to take the vote to the floor where they're most certainly going to vote against him. And why do that? The person that's been nominated is a fine judge, nothing against him. I mean, if you're a conservative, you don't like his voting record, but why embarrass the person and go through the process when in fact more than 50 Republicans have agreed that they're not going to vote on the nominee.
So, and I'd like to ask you in a few moments, we got to take a break in a moment, but the deciding factor, is there a standard in which the senators go through on the committee of whether or not a candidate is qualified, or is it up to each individual senator's judgment? So what were those deciding factors for you?
Well, it's up to each individual senator. There are certain things that are known to be disqualifying. You know, if you're a drug dealer when you were in college, you're probably not going to get a hearing, for example. But it's essentially up to each individual senator, and it's a combination of personal background. Does the person have the judicial temperament and honesty and education and knowledge and so on? And secondly, what is revealed in the person's background about judicial philosophy? And that's where Republicans and Democrats usually split. Democrats much more appreciate a liberal ideology, Republicans more the conservative ideology. And that's why you've seen not quite party line votes, but in recent years, almost party line votes on the nominees, whether by a Democrat or a Republican president.
All right, in a moment, a few things to talk with the senator about. Uniquely, he working on the water deal for Arizona and the states here in the southwestern United States, and the thing that came up with California. So in a moment, we'll talk to the senator about some of the things he did in the United States Senate, and then find out his opinions on some of the things going on today in Arizona and national politics. We'll be back. We're back with Senator Jon Kyl, who just gave us a great civics lesson on the Judiciary Committee. We all talk about whether or not the president should nominate this time, but a lot of people have no idea how that committee process works. Well, you and I talked at the convention. I don't know if you remember me talking to you about this. We did an interview there, and at the convention in Tampa.
It wasn't memorable enough.
I'm
listen, sorry, I don't remember.
The question I asked you was, your name had been mentioned as a possible nomination to the Supreme Court, and you said to me, absolutely not, and gave the most interesting answer. Do you still feel the same way?
Yeah, you do remember, yeah. First of all, I'm too old. It's good to get somebody who's a little bit younger and can be on the court for quite a while. And secondly,
some might disagree with that.
Well,
about being on for a really long time.
Well, there's a difference between a really long time and being on there long enough to make a difference. Even at the time we talked, I felt I would have been too old. But here's the reason I don't think I would have been a good choice. And presidents should consider this for others as well. It's always tempting to pick a senator because, after all, why wouldn't Republicans support one of their colleagues? They couldn't very well vote against him. The reality is, if you're in the United States Senate, you're all about public policy making. You're there because you believe in your heart that certain principles are worth getting reelected for or fighting for and so on. It's very hard to put those political and policy positions behind you, to have them have no influence whatsoever on how you would look at a case. In fact, I would argue it's impossible. And anybody that says, oh, I can do it, I can put all of that behind me, they're fooling you. And in fact, some of the judges that are on the court now came before our committee and said, oh, granted, we took these positions when we were law professors or whatever, but we can put all of that behind us. I said, no, you can't. And guess what? They haven't. It's very hard to do. If you're a judge and you've been a judge a long time and you're all about just looking at the facts and the law, you can probably do that. But if you have strong political views, it's very, very difficult.
For the people in Arizona, the farmers, the ranchers, the water issues here in Arizona, a lot of people may not know how instrumental you were in the agreement that was made. And that kind of was put to the test this year. We watched the water levels of Lake Mead drop last year, and California in the drought situation they were in. And what was said was Arizona is going to have to pay the price for California not being wise with water, because Arizona's done a pretty good job of storing water. What does that really look like? And what is the deal? And when do those things happen where we do have to start cutting back?
Well, there wasn't just one deal. There have been a series of there's the compact, there's legislation that authorized the Central Arizona Project, there's negotiation between Arizona, California, and Nevada about shortage sharing, what will happen when we do have a shortage and we have to all cut back a little bit. So there's a series of decisions and rules that affect the operation. But if we continue to have drought in the Southwest, and again this year we only got about 80% of normal precipitation, then there will come a point in time when the states have to begin to cut back a little bit. Arizona, because we needed California's support to fund the Central Arizona Project, had to make a kind of a devil's bargain there. We agreed with California that in the event of a shortage, we would be the first ones to cut back. California would be the last ones to cut back. In exchange for that, they allowed the CAP to be built. What it means is that in the future, in the next couple of years, for example, if Lake Mead continues to drop, then Arizona will begin to cut back a little bit. But that will not be felt by people in any of the urban areas or any of the rural areas of the state which do not rely on CAP water. It will primarily affect the amount that irrigated agriculture can receive. And the farmers who are potentially subject to this understand what they would have to do in that event. So, as you say, we are pretty well prepared to deal with this kind of eventuality. What we hope is that it doesn't last forever, because if that's the case, then we will see pretty dramatic changes here in the Southwest. In the meantime, there's a lot Arizona can do and is doing to try to ensure that we have all the water that we need. And we can promise to anybody coming out here from the east, for example, we've taken care of our water requirements. Don't worry, we'll have all that we need.
So as we see the urban sprawl and a lot of these areas that used to be cotton farms or hay fields now becoming homes, how does that change the usage in the agreement?
Actually, it's pretty interesting. The amount of water that it would take to put on a cotton field or an alfalfa field, for example, is almost exactly the same amount of water that the people consume when they build subdivisions on top of that. Okay. So again, we've done a pretty good job. Now, there are some situations where developers could exceed the available supply. There's some legislation pending in the state legislature right now, for example, that would promote that. Arizona needs to be very careful of that kind of legislation.
So before I let you go, anything going on in Washington since you've been gone that either made you say, man, I wish I was there for that, or man, am I glad I'm not there for that?
Well, I had a wonderful job representing the people of Arizona. The politics of it, of course, are something that you're happy to put behind you. But as a citizen, you can never completely put the politics behind you. And I encourage all of your listeners and viewers, you do a great job of continuing to keep people interested in the process. They need to be interested. I was happy to see the long lines in the Arizona primary recently. And that's an important thing, to everybody be involved. If you can't get involved directly in a campaign, at least be sure that you get out and vote and be informed about what's going on.
So you don't miss it at all? You don't miss the
No, I'm involved enough that it satisfies my desire to be involved, but I don't miss the day-to-day political shenanigans in the Congress. And the truth is, there's a lot of fighting in Congress. That's just the way it is.
Kind of the nature of the beast.
It is, and that's the way it was set up to be. And when people complain about folks not getting anything done, here's one vote for the U.S. Congress. Actually, they do quite a bit, but the things that they do together are not all that controversial. It's keeping the process moving. It's the really controversial stuff that then they have trouble on, and sometimes they fight to a draw and you don't get things done. And for these people to say, go back and get all this done, I say, just be careful what you pray for. They might do something and it might not be what you want.
Well, we appreciate the time as always in your service and the time you were in the Congress, and thanks for coming down.
Thanks to you and your listeners and viewers.
Senator Jon Kyl, we'll be back in a moment. That's why I'm such a big fan of Jon Kyl, such a wealth of information. Now the part of the show that's my favorite, something about Arizona, something to smile about. We call it Broomhead's Best. The National Park Service turns 100 years old, and Grand Canyon National Park, one of the 7 wonders of the world, is the second most visited park behind the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Arizona had 11 million visitors to its parks last year. Now, the way they are honoring the 100th anniversary is free admission to the parks, April 16th through the 24th. If you go up to Grand Canyon National Park, it's usually $30 per car, but you get in free April 16th through the 24th. Go and see one of the 7 wonders of the world and why we're called the Grand Canyon State. Now it's time for the part of the show that we call #this. This week's hashtag is Mike Fired. I sat down to interview my boss, the lady that runs the show. Her name is Lynn London. She turned the tables and interviewed me. Watch this. So like a confession?
Okay, we'll take a confession.
Okay, here's one. I know I'm going to shock you with this.
Okay.
I was 9 years old.
Don't make me fire you, Broomhead. This is our first.
This may get me fired. This may actually get me fired.
All right, well, I'm ready if you are.
Some people think it's taken a lot longer than we thought for that to happen, but did I actually get fired? What could I possibly have said that might get me fired here? Go to aztv.com, see the entire video and the interview where I try to interview the boss, but she actually turns the tables on me. What confession could I have had that would get me fired? That's the question. We got a little bit of time left here in the show. Don't go away yet. Before we wrap things up, I'll be right back. A special thank you to Jon Kyl, former United States Senator. He really is one of the true statesmen here in Arizona, responsible for the water agreement that really has done us a great service as drought across the Southwest. It sounds like a boring topic, but you can see how important it is to us and to our future here. On next week's show, we go back out to Luke Air Force Base and we sit down with Brigadier General Scott Ployce. We talk about Luke Air Force Base and the 56th Fighter Wing that he commands. This is where they train the best and the brightest we have to offer in the military, in the new F-35s and in the F-16s. That's all coming up on next week's show. Follow us on all the social media platforms. I'll be back next Saturday. God bless.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.